The sound of rain tapping against glass fills the air, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat counting down to something inevitable. Emma Calloway pulled her coat tighter around her as she stepped out of the taxi. The salty tang of the ocean mingled with the dampness of the rain-soaked evening, clinging to her skin like a second layer. Blackwater Cove stretched before her, a sleepy little town nestled between jagged cliffs and restless waves. It looked exactly as she remembered it from childhood visits. Quaint, quiet, and suffocatingly small. But tonight, there was something else. Something wrong. The rain seemed different. Heavier, somehow. Each droplet struck the ground with a sharp hiss, as if protesting its descent. Overhead, clouds churned like ink spilled across parchment, blotting out what little light remained of the dying day. Even the streetlights appeared dimmer than they should, their halos flickering weakly against the encroaching darkness. "Are you sure this is the place?" the driver asked, eyeing the decrepit house at the end of the lane. Its windows were dark, its paint peeling, and its porch sagging under the weight of time and neglect. "It's mine now," Emma replied flatly, though the words felt foreign on her tongue. She hadn't wanted to come back. Not to this place, not to these memories. But when her grandmother passed away 2 weeks ago, leaving everything to her, she'd had no choice. Her father refused to step foot in Blackwater Cove again, and her brother was too busy building his perfect life elsewhere. That left her. She paid the driver and grabbed her suitcase, watching as the taillights disappeared into the gloom. Then she turned to face the house. It loomed over her like a forgotten sentinel, its silhouette jagged against the stormy sky. For a moment, she thought she saw movement in one of the upstairs windows, a fleeting shadow cast by nothing tangible. She blinked, and it was gone. "Just your imagination," she muttered, shaking her head. Still, unease prickled at the edges of her mind as she climbed the creaking steps to the front door. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and dust, a testament to years of abandonment. Emma flipped the switch on the wall, but nothing happened. Of course, the power must be out. Sighing, she rummaged through her bag for the flashlight she'd brought, illuminating the narrow hallway ahead. Her footsteps echoed eerily as she moved deeper into the house, each room more decayed than the last. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and furniture lay shrouded in ghostly white sheets. Memories stirred unbidden, her grandmother baking pies in the kitchen, her mother laughing softly as she read by the fire. But those memories were tinged with sadness now, reminders of what she'd lost. As she reached the staircase leading to the second floor, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. The sound startled her, and she froze, clutching the flashlight tightly. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault, drumming against the roof and walls. And then she heard it. A whisper, faint, almost imperceptible, carried on the wind. She strained her ears, trying to make sense of it. At first, she thought it might be her imagination playing tricks again. But no. It came again, clearer this time. "Help us!" Emma's breath caught in her throat. She spun around, shining the flashlight into every corner of the hall. Nothing. Just shadows dancing mockingly in the pale beam of light. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound brave. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her, save for the ever-present patter of rain. Shaking her head, she forced herself to climb the stairs. Maybe fatigue was getting to her, or maybe it was the oppressive atmosphere of the house. Either way, she couldn't afford to let fear take hold. Not yet. When she finally reached her old bedroom, she pushed the door open cautiously. The room was much as she remembered it, floral wallpaper peeling at the edges, a rickety desk shoved against the far wall, and a single bed tucked beneath the window overlooking the backyard. She set her suitcase down and collapsed onto the mattress, staring up at the cracked ceiling. The rain sounded louder here, almost deafening. Closing her eyes, she tried to block it out, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of her breathing. But the whispers returned, softer now, almost tender. "You shouldn't have come back." Her eyes snapped open. Heart pounding, she sat up and scanned the room. The flashlight lay beside her, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Everything seemed normal, too normal, and yet deep down she knew something was terribly wrong. The next morning brought no relief from the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over Blackwater Cove. Though the rain had lessened to a drizzle, the sky remained an unbroken expanse of gray, casting the entire town in muted tones. Emma woke with a start, her heart pounding against her ribcage like a trapped bird desperate for escape. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling above her, the musty smell of old wood, the chill that permeated the air despite the heavy blankets she'd piled on herself during the night. Then memory flooded back. The taxi ride, the creaking stairs, the whispers. She shook her head, trying to dispel both the remnants of sleep and the unsettling thoughts that accompanied them. "It was just a trick of the wind," she muttered aloud, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Her bare feet touched the cold wooden floor, sending a shiver up her spine. After dressing in jeans and a sweater thick enough to ward off the persistent chill, Emma ventured downstairs. The house seemed different in daylight, though no less foreboding. Shafts of pale light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating motes of dust suspended in the air like tiny ghosts dancing in the gloom. She made her way to the kitchen, hoping to find some coffee among her grandmother's belongings. As she rummaged through cabinets, something caught her eye outside the window above the sink. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than the swaying branches of the ancient oak tree that dominated the backyard. But then she saw it again, a flicker of movement between the trunks, too deliberate to be mistaken for leaves rustling in the breeze. Emma froze, her fingers gripping the edge of the countertop. There it was again, a shadow, darker and more defined than any natural silhouette should be. It moved with purpose, slipping behind one tree only to reappear moments later near another, always staying just beyond clear view. "Hello?" she called out, immediately regretting the tremor in her voice. No response came except for the steady patter of raindrops hitting the glass. Determined not to let irrational fear take hold, Emma grabbed her jacket and stepped outside. The cool mist clung to her skin as she walked toward the spot where she'd seen the shadow. Nothing looked out of place, No footprints marred the damp earth beneath the trees. No evidence suggested anyone had been there at all. Yet as she turned back toward the house, a sudden gust of wind sent a flurry of dead leaves swirling around her ankles. And amidst their dry rustle, she thought she heard it again, that same whisper from last night. "Find me." This time, however, it wasn't merely a fragment carried on the wind. It formed actual words, spoken directly into her ear, though nothing stood beside her. Emma spun around, scanning the empty yard, but saw only the skeletal remains of bushes and the lifeless gaze of empty windows reflecting her own frightened expression. Back inside, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing heavily. Her rational mind screamed that such things weren't possible, that exhaustion and stress were playing tricks on her senses. Yet deep down, buried beneath layers of logic and reason, a small part of her knew better. Something about this house, this town, wasn't right. Over the next few hours, Emma occupied herself with unpacking what little she'd brought and exploring the rest of the house. In the attic, she discovered several boxes labeled mementos. Curiosity overcoming apprehension, she opened one to reveal stacks of yellowed photographs tied together with faded ribbon. Most depicted scenes from decades past. Family gatherings around holiday tables, summer picnics on sun-drenched lawns, children laughing while chasing each other through sprinklers. But one particular image stopped her cold. Taken sometime in the late 70s, judging by the clothing styles, it showed her mother standing alone on the porch of this very house, gazing out toward the ocean with an expression that could only be described as haunted. In the background, barely visible due to poor focus or perhaps intentional blurring, stood another figure. Its features were indistinct, almost smudged, but its presence loomed large nonetheless. Whoever, or whatever it was, it watched Emma's mother with unmistakable intent. A noise downstairs startled her from her reverie. Dropping the photo back into the box, she crept cautiously toward the staircase, every nerve ending tingling with anticipation. As she descended, the sound resolved itself into knocking, slow, deliberate taps coming from the front door. Peering through the peephole, she saw a man about 60 years old, dressed in a worn tweed jacket and holding an umbrella dripping rainwater onto the welcome mat. His face bore the weathered lines of someone who'd spent much of his life outdoors, and wire-rimmed glasses perched precariously on his nose. "Miss Calloway?" he asked when she opened the door a crack. "I'm Reginald Hawthorne, local historian and neighbor. I heard you'd arrived." Emma hesitated before unlatching the chain and allowing him entry. He introduced himself properly and explained that he'd known her grandmother well, often visiting to discuss town history and genealogy. While making small talk, he noticed the open boxes scattered across the living room floor. "You're going through Edith's things already?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Just starting," Emma admitted. "Found some old pictures upstairs." Mr. Hawthorne nodded knowingly. Edith was quite the collector, always saving bits and pieces of the past, convinced they held some greater meaning. He paused, studying her face intently. You look so much like your mother, you know. Same eyes, especially. At the mention of her mother, Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. Before she could respond, he continued, Blackwater Cove has peculiarities. Stories passed down through generations. Some say our storms aren't entirely natural. What do you mean? She asked, intrigued despite herself. He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. They call them the Weeping Ones. Spirits said to wander during heavy rains, searching for something lost, or someone. Though his tone remained casual, the weight of his words hung heavy in the air between them. Emma forced a laugh. Surely you don't believe in ghosts? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Belief isn't necessary for truth to exist, my dear. Just be careful what you listen for when the rain begins to fall. With that cryptic warning, he excused himself, leaving Emma alone once more with her thoughts, and the growing sense that returning to Blackwater Cove might have been a terrible mistake. The rain had returned by evening, steady and unrelenting, as if determined to wear away the fragile barrier between worlds. Emma sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by the remnants of her grandmother's life. Old letters, faded photographs, and dusty trinkets that whispered of a past she barely understood. She couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. Every creak of the house, every drip from the leaky ceiling above, seemed louder than it should be. Her skin prickled with unease, but she forced herself to focus on sorting through the boxes. If there was any chance of finding answers about her mother, they would be buried here among these relics. Her fingers brushed against an envelope tucked inside one of the photo albums. It was addressed simply, "To my dearest Emma." Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected anything so personal. Carefully, she opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper covered in her grandmother's neat handwriting. "My dear Emma, if you're reading this, I am gone, and Blackwater Cove has called you home once more. I hope you'll forgive me for leaving this burden in your hands, but some truths cannot remain hidden forever. Your mother, she sought answers where none were meant to be found. Be careful, my child. The rain carries voices, and not all of them wish us well. With love, Edith." Emma stared at the letter, her pulse quickening. What did her grandmother mean? And what exactly had her mother been searching for? A sharp knock at the door startled her, sending the letter fluttering to the floor. She rose hesitantly, peering through the peephole before opening it. Outside stood Lila Harper, clutching a steaming mug of tea in gloved hands. Her dark hair was damp from the rain, and her pale face glowed faintly in the dim porch light. "I brought you something," Lila said shyly, holding out the mug. "Thought you might need it after yesterday." Emma blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected company, let alone kindness from someone she barely knew. "Thanks," she said, stepping aside to let Lila in. "I didn't think anyone cared enough to check on me." Lila shrugged, brushing droplets off her coat. "People talk. They noticed you moving into Edith's place. Figured you could use a friend." "Friend?" Emma echoed skeptically. "We've exchanged maybe 5 words since I got here. That doesn't mean we can't start now." Lila offered a small smile, then gestured toward the mess of papers and photos scattered across the floor. Looks like you've been busy. Emma hesitated, unsure how much to share. But something about Lila's calm demeanor put her at ease. Just trying to make sense of things, she admitted, picking up her grandmother's letter. Found this today. Seems like everyone around here knows more about my family than I do. Lila glanced at the letter, her expression unreadable. Edith always kept secrets. Some say she dabbled in things best left alone. What kind of things? Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Stories go back generations, about storms bringing spirits closer to our world. Whispers carried on the wind calling out to those who listen too closely. Emma frowned. You sound like Mr. Hawthorne. He mentioned something similar yesterday about the weeping ones. The weeping ones, Lila repeated softly, almost reverently. They're tied to the storms, lost souls trapped between worlds. Most people don't believe it, of course, but when the rain falls hard enough... She trailed off, shaking her head. Never mind. Forget I said anything. No, Emma insisted, leaning forward. Tell me, please. My mom disappeared during a storm. If there's even a chance these stories are true... Lila sighed, sitting down beside her. All right. But promise me you won't go looking for trouble. Sometimes curiosity costs more than it's worth. Emma nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. I just want to know what happened to her. For a while they sat in silence, the rain tapping insistently against the windows. Then Lila spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. There's a ritual, a way to open a doorway between worlds. People used to try it during storms, hoping to speak with their dead. But most never came back. Those who did, they weren't the same afterward. Emma's stomach churned. Could her mother have tried such a thing? Was that why she vanished? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Suddenly the lights flickered. Both women froze, staring at the bulb overhead as it dimmed and brightened erratically. The air grew colder, heavy with an unnatural stillness. Did you hear that? Lila whispered, her wide eyes darting toward the window. At first Emma thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, a low guttural whisper, clearer than before. Find me. This time there was no mistaking it. The voice wasn't outside, it was inside the house, close enough to touch. Emma's heart raced as she turned toward the source of the sound. Standing in the shadows near the staircase was a figure, its form indistinct but unmistakably human. Who's there? She demanded, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head, studying her with hollow, glowing eyes. Then, without warning, it lunged forward, dissolving into smoke before it reached her. Emma stumbled backward, gasping for air. Beside her, Lila clutched her arm tightly. We need to leave. Now. But what was that? Emma stammered, pointing toward the empty space where the figure had been. I told you, Lila said grimly. The whispers come first, then the shadows. After that, She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Emma's mind raced. Whatever force had taken her mother was still here, lurking just beyond the veil. And now, it knew she was listening. Over the next few days, the whispers grew stronger, more insistent. They followed Emma wherever she went, in the hallways of the house, along the deserted streets of Blackwater Cove, even in her dreams. Each time, they promised answers, urging her to seek them out. One night, unable to sleep, she ventured into the basement, drawn by a faint humming noise emanating from below. The air was thick with moisture, and the walls glistened with condensation. In the corner, she found a strange symbol carved into the stone, a circle bisected by jagged lines, surrounded by runes she didn't recognize. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. Emma traced the symbol with her fingers, feeling a jolt of energy surge through her body. The whispers erupted in a cacophony, overlapping and desperate. "Help us! Save her! Let us in!" Tears streamed down her face as she realized the truth. Her mother wasn't dead. She was trapped somewhere between worlds, calling out for rescue. And Emma would do whatever it took to bring her back, even if it meant crossing the threshold herself. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, its damp air clinging to Emma's skin like a second layer. She sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, her flashlight casting long shadows across the stone walls. In front of her lay the symbol she'd discovered, a jagged circle etched into the foundation, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. It felt alive, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers that had grown louder since she'd touched it. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for her backpack, pulling out the journal she'd found earlier among her grandmother's belongings. Its leather cover was cracked and brittle, the pages yellowed with age. She opened it carefully, scanning the cramped handwriting that filled each sheet. Her grandmother's words spilled across the paper in frantic bursts, detailing experiments, rituals, and warnings. At first glance, the entries seemed disjointed, ramblings of an old woman haunted by grief and guilt. But as Emma read further, patterns emerged. References to storms, spirits, and portals began to repeat themselves, forming a narrative that sent chills down her spine. Entry number 12. October 14th, 1978. The storm tonight is unlike any I've seen before. The wind howls like a living thing, and the rain carries voices, not just whispers, but cries, pleas for help. I fear they're growing stronger. If what Mr. Hawthorne says is true, then these spirits are not content to remain trapped between worlds. They want passage. Entry number 23, November 2nd, 1982. Margaret believes she can reach them, that she can bring back those we've lost. She won't listen to reason. I tried to stop her, but she insists the ritual will work. What if she succeeds? What if she opens something we cannot close? Entry number 35, March 6th, 1983. It happened last night. Margaret performed the ritual under the full moon during the worst storm of the season. I heard her chanting from my room, her voice rising above the thunder. When I reached the basement, she was gone. Only the symbol remained, glowing faintly in the darkness. I called her name, but no answer came. Instead, there were whispers. So many whispers. They told me she was still here somewhere beyond the veil. Emma's breath hitched as she turned the page. A detailed diagram of the symbol in the basement stared back at her, surrounded by annotations and instructions. Her grandmother had documented every step of the ritual Margaret, her mother, had attempted decades ago. The final entry stopped her cold. Entry number 48, December 12th, 1990. I've made a terrible mistake. By writing this journal, I've preserved knowledge that should never have been recorded. If anyone finds it, they must destroy it immediately. The ritual doesn't open a doorway, it tears one apart. Those who cross over don't return whole, and those left behind, they become targets. The spirits feed on their grief, drawing strength from our longing for connection. Please, whoever reads this, do not attempt what Margaret did. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Emma closed the journal, her hands shaking violently. The weight of her grandmother's warning pressed down on her chest, suffocating her with doubt. Could she really risk opening the same portal that had taken her mother? Was it worth the danger? To herself? To others? A soft rustling sound drew her attention. At first she thought it was the wind, but then she noticed movement near the staircase. Shadows writhed along the wall, twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. One of them detached itself from the rest, forming a humanoid figure that hovered inches above the ground. Its face was featureless except for two hollow eyes that burned with crimson light. It tilted its head, studying her with unnatural curiosity. "Who are you?" Emma whispered, clutching the journal tightly. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it extended a skeletal hand toward her, beckoning silently. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping in a cacophony of voices. "Let us in! Save her! Help us!" Emma scrambled backward, her heart pounding. "Leave me alone!" The shadow recoiled, dissolving into smoke as quickly as it had appeared. But the whispers lingered, echoing in the empty space around her. When Emma finally climbed the stairs and emerged into the main part of the house, she found Lila waiting for her in the kitchen. The artist looked pale, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. "You went into the basement, didn't you?" Lila asked, her voice low and accusatory. "How did you know?" Emma replied, startled. "I heard the whispers." Lila gestured toward the ceiling. "They're louder when you're near the symbol." Emma hesitated, then placed the journal on the table. "I think I know what happened to my mom. She tried to open a portal using this ritual. My grandmother warned her not to, but she did it anyway." Lila's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. This is dangerous. You shouldn't even be reading it." "I need answers," Emma insisted, her voice breaking. "If my mom's still out there, if she's trapped, I have to try." "But at what cost?" Lila countered sharply. "Your grandmother said the ritual tears things apart. Do you really want to risk unleashing whatever's on the other side?" Emma fell silent, staring at the journal. She knew Lila was right. The risks were enormous. But the thought of leaving her mother trapped in some liminal void was unbearable. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to act, to do something. What if we could control it? She asked quietly. What if we only opened the portal long enough to bring her back? Lila sighed, running a hand through her damp hair. There's no guarantee it'll work. And even if it does, your mom might not be the same person anymore. Crossing over changes people, sometimes permanently. Emma nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of Lila's words, but deep down she already knew her decision. She couldn't walk away, not now, not after coming so far. Will you help me? She asked, meeting Lila's gaze. For a long moment, Lila said nothing. Then she exhaled sharply, nodding once. Fine. But we do this together, and we follow the instructions exactly. No shortcuts. Relief flooded through Emma, though it was tinged with apprehension. Together, they spent the next hour poring over the journal, memorizing the steps of the ritual. According to the text, it required 3 components: the symbol carved into the earth, a chant spoken in Latin, and an offering of blood to activate the portal. As dawn broke outside, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold, Emma felt a strange mix of dread and determination settle over her. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready, or as ready as she could be. By midday, the preparations were complete. The symbol glowed faintly beneath the basement floor, its runes shimmering with latent energy. The air grew heavier with each passing hour, charged with electricity that crackled against Emma's skin. She could feel the storm building outside, clouds gathering in anticipation of the night to come. Lila stood beside her, holding a knife in trembling hands. Are you sure about this? She asked one last time. Emma swallowed hard, steeling herself. We don't have a choice. As they waited for nightfall, the whispers returned, swirling around them like a chorus of lost souls. They promised answers, begged for release, pleaded for salvation. And beneath it all, Emma thought she heard her mother's voice, soft and desperate. Find me. The storm outside had grown restless, its fury building with every passing hour. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, illuminating the darkened corners of Blackwater Cove. Inside the house, shadows danced along the walls, their movements erratic and unnatural. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, as if the spirits knew what Emma and Lila were planning. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the journal in her lap. Its worn leather cover seemed to pulse faintly under the dim light of her bedside lamp, as though it were alive and aware of her intentions. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, not just by the shadows in the room, but by something far older and more malevolent. Lila knocked softly on the doorframe before stepping inside. You should get some rest, she said gently. We'll need all our strength for tonight. I can't sleep, Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Every time I close my eyes, I see her. My mom. Lila hesitated, then sat down beside her. Do you remember much about her? Emma shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. Not really. She disappeared when I was 6. All I have are fragments, her laughter, the way she used to braid my hair before bed, the smell of lavender soap on her skin. But over the years, those memories faded. My dad refused to talk about her, and eventually, so did I. That must have been hard, Lila murmured. It was. Emma swallowed hard, clutching the journal tighter. But finding this, she gestured toward the book. It's like she's come back into my life, even if only as a ghost. I feel closer to her now than I have in years. Lila nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's why you're here. Not just to uncover the truth, but to reconnect with her. Before Emma could respond, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. For a brief moment, the shadowy figure from the basement appeared in the corner of the room, its hollow eyes glowing red. Then, as quickly as it had come, it vanished. "Did you see that?" Emma gasped, pointing toward the spot where the figure had stood. Lila's face went pale. "Yeah, it's getting worse. They know what we're planning." Emma shivered, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "What if we're making a mistake? What if opening the portal doesn't bring my mom back, it just lets them in?" "We'll deal with that when it happens," Lila replied firmly, though her voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "For now, we focus on the ritual, stick to the plan, and we'll be okay." Despite her reassurance, neither woman slept that night. Instead, they spent the early hours of the morning reviewing the journal, double-checking each step of the ritual. By sunrise, exhaustion weighed heavily on them both, but the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had grown stronger, battering the house with relentless force. Later that afternoon, as the rain continued to pour, Emma decided to take a walk along the cliffs overlooking the ocean. She needed fresh air, a moment of clarity before the chaos of the evening began. The wind whipped at her coat, carrying with it the salty tang of seawater and the faint scent of earth soaked through with rain. As she approached the edge of the cliff, she noticed something unusual. A cluster of rocks arranged in a circular pattern, similar to the symbol carved into the basement floor. Kneeling down, she traced the outline with her fingers, feeling a strange warmth emanating from the stones. Suddenly, the world around her shifted. The sound of the storm faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. Before she could react, a vision overtook her senses. She was standing in the same spot, but the landscape had changed. The cliffs were greener, the sky darker, and the ocean calmer. In the distance, she saw a figure walking toward her, a woman with long auburn hair and a familiar smile. "Mom?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. The woman stopped a few feet away, gazing at her with an expression of both love and sorrow. "Emma," she said softly, "my sweet girl." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she reached out, but the figure remained just out of reach. "Where are you? Are you trapped here?" Her mother nodded, her form flickering like a candle flame caught in the wind. "I tried to save them, to help the lost find peace, but the ritual went wrong. Now I'm stuck between worlds, unable to move on. Who are they? Emma asked desperately. The ones who've been following me, whispering? They're not all evil, her mother replied. Some are lost, confused. Others, they feed on grief and fear. Be careful, Emma. Don't let them trick you. But I can bring you back, right? Emma pleaded. The ritual? No. Her mother's voice was sharp, urgent. Don't trust the ritual. It's dangerous. You'll open a door that can't be closed. Before Emma could argue, the vision dissolved, leaving her alone once again on the cliffside. The storm roared back to life, drenching her within seconds. Shaken but resolute, she made her way back to the house. When she returned, Lila was waiting anxiously in the living room. Where have you been? I was worried sick. I went for a walk, Emma explained, still trying to process what she'd seen. And I think I spoke to my mom. Lila's eyes widened. What did she say? She warned me about the ritual, said it's too dangerous, that it'll open a door we can't close. Lila frowned, pacing the length of the room. That's exactly what your grandmother wrote in the journal. Maybe we should reconsider. No, Emma interrupted firmly. If there's even a chance I can save her, I have to try. I won't abandon her again. Lila sighed, running a hand through her damp hair. All right, but promise me one thing. If things go south, we stop, no matter what. Emma nodded, though doubt lingered in her mind. As dusk fell and the storm intensified, they prepared for the ritual. Candles were lit, arranged in a circle around the glowing symbol in the basement. The air was thick with anticipation, charged with an energy that made Emma's skin prickle. Standing beside Lila, Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The whispers swirled around them, growing louder and more insistent. Among them, she thought she heard her mother's voice, soft and pleading. Please, don't do this. But it was too late to turn back now. The storm raged on, its fury unrelenting. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, illuminating the darkened streets of Blackwater Cove. Inside the house, the air was thick with anticipation, heavy as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Emma and Lila stood in the basement, the ritual circle glowing faintly beneath their feet, waiting for the moment when the storm would reach its peak. But before they could proceed, there was one more piece of the puzzle to uncover, one that lay buried not in the journal, but in the town itself. Lila glanced at her watch, then back at Emma. We have a few hours before the storm hits its strongest point. Maybe we should talk to Mr. Hawthorne again. He might know something about those rocks you found on the cliff. Emma hesitated, glancing at the journal still clutched in her hands. I don't think we have time for this. Every second counts. Trust me, Lila insisted. If anyone knows the history of this place, it's him. And if your mom performed the ritual near those rocks, there's got to be a reason why. Reluctantly, Emma agreed. They grabbed their coats and stepped outside, braving the torrential rain that soaked them within moments. The wind howled like a living thing, tugging at their clothes and whipping strands of hair across their faces. Despite the chaos around them, the town seemed eerily deserted, as though even the residents had sensed the approaching danger and taken shelter. Mr. Hawthorne's house was a short walk away, a small, weathered cottage perched near the edge of the forest. Its windows glowed warmly against the gloom, offering a flicker of comfort in an otherwise oppressive atmosphere. Lila knocked sharply on the door, and after a moment it creaked open to reveal the elderly historian, his face lined with concern. "Miss Calloway? Miss Harper?" he asked, peering out at them through wire-rimmed glasses. "What brings you here in such weather?" "We need your help," Emma said without preamble. "It's about the ritual my mom tried, the one she did on the cliffs." Mr. Hawthorne's expression darkened. He stepped aside, ushering them inside. "Come in, quickly." His home was cluttered yet cozy, filled with shelves upon shelves of books, maps, and artifacts from Blackwater Cove's past. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow over the room. As they settled into chairs by the fireplace, Mr. Hawthorne studied them intently. "What do you know?" he asked, finally. Emma explained what she'd seen during her vision on the cliffs, the arrangement of rocks, the presence of her mother, and the warning she'd received. When she finished, Mr. Hawthorne sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. "The rocks you described, they're part of an ancient marker," he began. "Long before settlers arrived, this land belonged to the Wampanoag people. They believed the cliffs were sacred, a threshold between worlds. During storms, they claimed spirits would gather there, seeking passage to the other side." "Passage to where?" Lila asked. "To whatever lies beyond death," Mr. Hawthorne replied grimly. "But the Wampanoag also warned of something darker, entities that preyed on grief and longing. They called them Manitou, spirits of mischief and malice. Over time, the stories evolved, becoming legends of the weeping ones who wander during storms." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "So my mom wasn't just trying to contact the dead? She was opening a doorway, one that let these Manitou in." "Exactly," Mr. Hawthorne confirmed. "And once opened, such doors are nearly impossible to close. That's why Edith begged me never to speak of it, to keep the knowledge hidden." "But why didn't anyone stop her?" Emma demanded, her voice trembling with frustration. "Why didn't someone warn her?" "Because no one believed her," he admitted sadly. "Margaret was determined, convinced she could control the ritual. By the time we realized what she'd done, it was too late." A heavy silence fell over the room. Emma stared into the fire, her mind racing. If her mother had truly unleashed these entities, then the whispers weren't just random voices. They were remnants of something far older and more dangerous. And now she was planning to reopen the same portal. "What happens if we try again?" Lila asked quietly. "If we perform the ritual tonight?" Mr. Hawthorne hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "If you succeed in bringing Margaret back, you may also release the Manitou fully into our world. Or worse, trap yourself in theirs." Emma clenched her fists, anger and desperation warring within her. "There has to be another way." I can't leave her there, not after everything. There is one possibility, Mr. Hawthorne said slowly. An old remedy mentioned in the tribal records. It involves creating a binding circle, not to open a portal, but to seal it permanently. However, it requires an offering of great significance, something tied to both bloodline and memory. Emma frowned. Like what? He gestured toward the journal in her lap. Perhaps Edith left clues. Rituals often require personal items, hair, clothing, or even memories imbued with emotion. Whatever you choose, it must be powerful enough to anchor the seal. As the weight of his words sank in, Emma realized the enormity of what she was about to attempt. This wasn't just about saving her mother anymore. It was about protecting the entire town from the darkness threatening to spill over. Thank you, she said finally, rising to her feet, for telling us the truth. Mr. Hawthorne nodded solemnly. Be careful, Miss Calloway. Some secrets are buried for a reason. By the time they returned to the house, the storm had reached a fever pitch. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder shook the foundation. In the basement, the symbol pulsed brighter than ever, its runes glowing with an eerie blue light. Lila spread out the journal on the floor, flipping through the pages until she found a section marked Sealing the Veil. Together they pored over the instructions, committing each step to memory. We'll need something of hers, Lila murmured, pointing to a note about the binding circle. Something that belonged to your mom. Emma thought for a moment, then hurried upstairs to her grandmother's attic. Among the boxes of photographs and mementos, she found a small wooden box containing a lock of her mother's hair, tied with a faded ribbon. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up, the weight of the gesture settling over her like a shroud. When she returned to the basement, Lila was arranging candles around the symbol, reinforcing the protective barrier. Ready? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Emma nodded, clutching the lock of hair tightly. Let's do this. As midnight approached, the ritual began. Emma knelt at the center of the circle, placing the lock of hair beside her. She recited the incantation written in the journal, her voice rising above the roar of the storm. Each word felt like a spark igniting the air, sending ripples of energy through the room. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever before. Shadows writhed along the walls, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. One of them detached itself from the rest, looming over Emma like a specter. You cannot save her. Emma ignored it, focusing on the chant. The symbol flared to life, its glow intensifying until it filled the entire room. For a brief moment, she saw her mother's face among the shadows, her expression filled with sorrow and warning. Then, with a deafening crack, the portal opened. The air crackled with energy, thick and electric, as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched to its limits. The symbol carved into the basement floor pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Emma's voice trembled as she recited the incantation from the journal, each word resonating like a bell tolling in the depths of some forgotten abyss. Lila stood at the edge of the circle, her hands gripping the hem of her sweater so tightly her knuckles turned white. She watched as the candles flickered wildly, their flames bending toward the glowing runes beneath Emma's knees. The storm outside mirrored the chaos within the room, rain pounding against the windows like fists trying to break through. "Keep going," Lila urged, though her voice wavered with fear. "Don't stop!" Emma nodded, forcing herself to focus despite the rising cacophony of whispers. They swirled around her now, overlapping voices speaking in languages she couldn't understand. Some begged for help, others screamed warnings. Through the din, one voice stood out. Her mother's, soft and pleading. "Please, don't do this." Emma clenched her jaw, tears streaming down her face. She wanted nothing more than to obey her mother's plea, but she couldn't turn back. Not after coming so far. If there was even a chance of saving her, she had to see it through. As she reached the final lines of the chant, the symbol erupted in a blinding flash of blue light. The temperature plummeted, frost creeping along the edges of the circle. Shadows coalesced into humanoid forms, their hollow eyes glowing red with malevolent intent. "They're here," Lila whispered, backing away instinctively. "They've come through." Emma ignored her, focusing instead on the lock of hair resting beside her. She placed her hand over it, channeling every ounce of emotion she felt, grief, longing, love, into the binding circle. The glow intensified, forming a barrier between the spirits and the living world. But the entities weren't content to stay trapped. One of them lunged forward, its skeletal hand reaching for Emma. She flinched, but the barrier held firm, repelling the creature with a deafening hiss. "Seal the veil!" Lila shouted, pointing frantically to the final step in the journal. Emma scrambled to retrieve the dagger they'd prepared earlier, a small ornate blade engraved with protective sigils. With trembling hands, she pressed the tip to her palm and drew blood, letting it drip onto the glowing runes. The moment the crimson liquid touched the symbol, the entire room shook violently. A deafening roar filled the air, drowning out the sound of the storm. The spirits shrieked in unison, their cries echoing like nails scraping against glass. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise ceased. The light faded, leaving only the dim glow of the candles and the steady patter of rain outside. For a moment, silence reigned. Emma collapsed onto the cold floor, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. Her body ached from the strain, and her mind felt foggy, as though she'd been pulled through a riptide and spat out on unfamiliar shores. "Did it work?" Lila asked hesitantly, stepping closer to inspect the symbol. It no longer glowed, but faint traces of frost lingered along its edges. I think so," Emma replied, her voice hoarse. "The portal's closed." But before either of them could celebrate, a low hum vibrated through the room. It started softly, almost imperceptibly, then grew louder, resonating deep within their bones. The candles extinguished themselves one by one, plunging the basement into darkness. "What's happening?" Lila whispered, panic creeping into her tone. Emma didn't answer. She could feel it, the presence of something vast and ancient, watching them from beyond the veil. Though the portal was sealed, the ritual had awakened something else, something that refused to be ignored. A single candle reignited, its flame casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. In the corner of the room, a figure materialized, a tall, gaunt silhouette draped in tattered robes. Its face was obscured beneath a hood, but its glowing red eyes pierced through the gloom, pinning Emma where she sat. "You dare disturb the balance," it rasped, its voice layered with countless others, each one dripping with malice and despair. "For this transgression, you will pay." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but no words came. Beside her, Lila backed away slowly, her wide eyes fixed on the apparition. We didn't mean to," Lila stammered. "We were trying to seal the portal." "The damage is done," the entity replied, taking a step forward. "The threads of fate have unraveled. Now all must unravel with them." Before either woman could react, the figure raised a skeletal hand, and the room exploded in a burst of icy wind. Books flew off shelves, chairs toppled over, and the walls groaned under the pressure. Emma shielded her face with her arms, bracing herself against the onslaught. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the chaos subsided. The figure vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and the lingering sense of dread. When Emma finally dared to look up, Lila was crouched beside her, shaking uncontrollably. What was that?" she gasped. "I don't know," Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think we made things worse." Lila helped her to her feet, both women surveying the wreckage of the basement. The symbol was scorched into the floor, its runes blackened and cracked. Whatever power it had once held was gone, replaced by an ominous emptiness. "We need to leave," Lila said urgently. "Now! Before whatever that thing was decides to come back." Emma hesitated, glancing at the lock of her mother's hair still lying on the ground. "But my mom, she wouldn't want you risking your life for her," Lila interrupted firmly. "Not like this. Not when it puts everyone else in danger, too." Reluctantly, Emma nodded. Together, they gathered what few supplies they could carry and fled the house, stepping out into the storm-soaked night. The streets of Blackwater Cove lay eerily silent, as though the entire town held its breath, waiting for the inevitable reckoning. Hours later, they found refuge in Lila's studio, a cramped but cozy space filled with canvases and half-finished paintings. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them both, but neither could sleep. Instead, they huddled together on the couch, listening to the rain drumming against the roof. "What do we do now?" Lila asked quietly, breaking the silence. Emma stared at the wall, her mind racing. "We find another way. There has to be something we missed. Some clue in the journal or in the town's history that can help us fix this. And if there isn't?" Emma turned to meet Lila's gaze, determination burning in her eyes. "Then we fight. Whatever that thing was, it doesn't get to decide our fate. Not while I still have breath in my body." The rain continued its relentless assault on Blackwater Cove, as if the sky itself were mourning the disturbance that had been unleashed. Inside Lila's studio, the faint scent of wet paint mingled with the metallic tang of fear. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by scattered pages from her grandmother's journal and hastily scribbled notes. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when every second felt like borrowed time. Lila paced nervously behind her, occasionally glancing toward the window. "We should have left town," she muttered under her breath. "This isn't our fight." "It is now," Emma replied without looking up. "That thing, it knows who I am. It'll come for me whether I run or stay." "But you're not prepared for this," Lila snapped, her frustration boiling over. "You don't even know what it is, let alone how to fight it." Emma finally looked up, her expression resolute despite the exhaustion etched into her features. "Then we find out. There has to be something in here, some clue about what happened after my mom opened the portal." She flipped through the journal again, scanning the cramped handwriting for anything they might have missed. Most of the entries focused on rituals and warnings, but one passage near the end caught her attention. Entry number 52, January 3rd, 1995. "The Manitou are restless. Ever since Margaret's attempt, their presence grows stronger with each storm. They feed on grief, amplifying it until it consumes those who linger too long in sorrow. But there's something else, a greater force awakened by the ritual, something ancient. I've seen glimpses of it in my dreams. A figure cloaked in shadow, its voice layered with countless others. It calls itself the Weaver." "The Weaver?" Emma whispered aloud, her stomach twisting with dread. "What does that mean?" Lila asked, kneeling beside her. "I think it's what we saw in the basement. The thing that came through the portal. My grandmother called it ancient and said it feeds on grief. That must be why it targeted us. It sensed how much I wanted to save my mom." Lila frowned, connecting the dots. "So your mom's disappearance wasn't just an accident. Opening the portal summoned the Weaver, and it's been using her absence to keep you, and maybe others, trapped in guilt and longing." Emma nodded slowly, piecing together the implications. "Which means closing the portal won't be enough. We need to confront it directly, to sever its connection to us." "And how exactly do we do that?" Lila asked skeptically. It didn't seem particularly interested in negotiation last time. Emma hesitated, flipping through the journal once more. Near the back, she found a folded map of Blackwater Cove, marked with symbols corresponding to locations mentioned earlier. The cliffs where her mother performed the ritual, the rocks forming the ancient marker, and several other sites scattered throughout the town. "There are ley lines," Emma explained, pointing to the map. "Energy pathways that connect these places. If we disrupt them, we might weaken the Weaver's hold on this world." Lila studied the map, her brow furrowed. "Even if that works, it won't be easy. These spots aren't random. They're tied to the town's history. People will notice if we start digging around." "We don't have a choice," Emma said firmly. "If we don't act, the Weaver will only grow stronger, and next time it might not let us walk away." By dawn, they had devised a plan. Their first target was the ancient marker on the cliffs, the same place where Emma had experienced her vision of her mother. According to the journal, Disrupting the energy flow at key points along the ley lines would destabilize the Weaver's influence, making it vulnerable to banishment. As they approached the cliffs, the storm showed no signs of abating. Waves crashed violently against the rocks below, sending sprays of salt water into the air. The wind whipped at their clothes, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers.
"This feels like a bad idea,"
Lila murmured, clutching her coat tighter around her. "Probably is," Emma admitted wryly. "But here we are anyway." They reached the circle of rocks and began tracing the runes carved into their surfaces. Using chalk and protective sigils copied from the journal, they altered the markings, redirecting the energy flow. Each change sent a ripple through the air, accompanied by a low hum that resonated deep within their chests. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A dark mist rose from the ocean, swirling into the shape of a towering figure, the same entity they'd encountered in the basement. "You dare defy me," it rasped, its voice layered with countless others. "Your arrogance will be your undoing." Emma stepped forward, holding up the dagger engraved with protective sigils. "Leave us alone. You don't belong here." The Weaver tilted its head, studying her with glowing red eyes. "I belong wherever despair takes root, and your grief, it is fertile ground." Before Emma could respond, the creature lunged, its form dissolving into tendrils of shadow that snaked toward her. She slashed wildly with the dagger, the blade emitting sparks where it made contact. The impact sent her stumbling backward, but she managed to stay upright. "Now!" she shouted to Lila. Lila scrambled to complete the final alteration to the runes. As she finished, the circle of rocks erupted in a burst of golden light, forcing the Weaver to retreat. Its screams echoed across the cliffs, fading into the roar of the storm. When the light faded, the air felt lighter, as though some oppressive weight had been lifted. Emma sank to her knees, breathing heavily. "Did it work?" "For now," Lila replied, helping her to her feet. "But it's still out there. We've only slowed it down." Emma nodded grimly. "Then we keep going, one site at a time." Over the next 2 days, they worked tirelessly, traveling to each location marked on the map. At each site, they encountered manifestations of the Weaver, shadows that clawed at them, voices that screamed in their ears, illusions designed to prey on their fears. But with each successful disruption, the entity grew weaker, its presence less tangible. Finally, they reached the last site, the forest clearing where Mr. Hawthorne claimed the original tribal ceremonies had taken place. Unlike the other locations, this one radiated an almost palpable sense of wrongness. The trees seemed twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air was unnaturally cold, and the whispers were deafening. "This is it," Emma said softly, clutching the dagger tightly. "The heart of the ley line network." Lila glanced around nervously. "Something's watching us." Sure enough, shadows began to coalesce in the center of the clearing, forming the familiar shape of the Weaver. This time, however, it was larger, its presence overwhelming. Its red eyes burned with fury as it regarded them. "You cannot win," it hissed, its voice echoing like thunder. "Even if you destroy me, the grief within you will remain. It will consume you, just as it consumed your mother." Emma hesitated, the truth of its words piercing her resolve. For years she had carried the weight of her mother's disappearance, blaming herself for not being there when it mattered most. But now, standing face to face with the source of her nightmares, she realized something crucial. Grief wasn't meant to be carried alone. "She's not gone," Emma said firmly, tears streaming down her face. "And neither am I." With that, she plunged the dagger into the ground, activating the final set of runes. The clearing erupted in blinding light, obliterating the weaver's form. Its scream reverberated through the forest, then faded into silence. When the light subsided, the clearing was peaceful once more. The oppressive atmosphere had vanished, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Exhausted but triumphant, Emma and Lila leaned against each other, watching as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. For the first time in weeks, the rain had stopped. The forest clearing was bathed in the soft glow of dawn, its oppressive shadows banished by the light of a new day. The air smelled fresh and clean, free from the weight of dread that had lingered for so long. Yet despite the victory they'd achieved, Emma felt no sense of relief, only an aching emptiness, as though severing the weaver's connection had left a void she wasn't sure how to fill. Lila sat cross-legged on the damp grass, her face pale but resolute. "We did it," she said softly, breaking the silence. "It's over." Emma shook her head, staring at the dagger still embedded in the earth. "Is it? We stopped the weaver, but my mom's still out there, somewhere between worlds." Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe this was never about bringing her back. Maybe it was about letting go." Emma's throat tightened, tears welling up in her eyes. "I can't just let her go. Not after everything I've done to find her." "You're not letting her go," Lila replied gently. "You're honoring her memory. She sacrificed herself trying to help others, to save people who were lost. That's who she was, Emma. And if you keep chasing her ghost, you'll lose yourself in the process." Emma didn't respond. Instead, she pulled the journal from her bag, flipping through its pages one last time. Near the end, she found an entry she hadn't noticed before, a hurried scrawl written in her grandmother's shaky handwriting. Entry number 55, March 12, 1996. "I see her sometimes, in dreams, in reflections, in the spaces between moments. Margaret isn't gone. She exists in the liminal realm, tethered to us by love and regret. But she isn't whole anymore. Crossing over changed her, fractured her soul into pieces scattered across both worlds. If she ever returns, it won't be as the woman we knew." Emma's hands trembled as she read the words aloud. Her grandmother had known all along that Margaret Calloway, The woman who used to braid her daughter's hair and laugh at the dinner table no longer existed. Whatever remained of her was trapped in a place neither living nor dead, forever altered by the ritual. "What does this mean?" Lila asked quietly. "It means..." Emma trailed off, struggling to find the right words. "It means I have to make a choice. Do I keep trying to bring her back, even if it destroys me? Or do I accept that she's gone?" Lila placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But remember what your grandmother said. Some doors are meant to stay closed." That night, unable to sleep, Emma wandered back to the cliffs overlooking the ocean. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a sky filled with stars. She stood at the edge of the precipice, gazing out at the endless expanse of water, its surface shimmering under the moonlight. As she stared into the darkness, she felt a familiar presence, a warmth that seemed to envelop her like a hug. Slowly, she turned around and saw her mother standing there, translucent and glowing faintly, like sunlight filtered through glass. "Mom," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Margaret smiled sadly, reaching out a hand, but stopping just short of touching her daughter. "Emma," she said softly. "My sweet girl." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she took a hesitant step forward. "I tried to save you. I thought I could bring you back." "I know," Margaret replied, her voice layered with both love and sorrow. "But you can't, sweetheart. Not without losing yourself and everyone else in the process." "But why did you do it?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you risk everything?" Margaret's expression softened, her eyes filled with compassion. "Because I believed I could make a difference. Because I wanted to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. It was selfish, too. I thought I could cheat death, defy the rules of the universe. But now I understand. Some things aren't meant to be undone." Emma shook her head, clutching her arms tightly around herself. "I don't want to say goodbye." "You don't have to," Margaret assured her. "I'll always be with you, in your memories, in your heart. That's where I belong. Not here. Not anymore." For a moment, Emma allowed herself to imagine what life might look like without the constant ache of loss. She pictured laughter shared with friends, quiet evenings spent painting or writing, even the possibility of love someday. Her mother wouldn't be physically present, but she would live on in every decision Emma made, every act of kindness she performed. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered finally, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves below. "For everything. There's nothing to forgive," Margaret replied, stepping closer. This time, when she reached out, her hand brushed against Emma's cheek, cold yet impossibly tender. "You've made me proud, Emma. Now it's time to let go." With those words, her form began to fade, dissolving into the starlit sky like mist carried away by the wind. Emma watched until the last trace of her vanished, leaving only the sound of the ocean and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. When she returned to Lila's studio, she found her friend curled up on the couch, sketching idly in a notebook. At the sight of Emma's tear-streaked face, Lila set the pencil aside and opened her arms. Without hesitation, Emma sank into the embrace, allowing herself to cry. Not just for her mother, but for the years of grief and guilt she'd carried alone. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to hold it all inside.
I'm ready,
she said finally, pulling away and wiping her eyes.
to move on.
Lila smiled, squeezing her hand.
Good. Because Blackwater Cove isn't done with us yet.
Over the next few days, Emma began sorting through her grandmother's belongings, deciding what to keep and what to donate. Among the boxes, she found a small wooden chest containing letters and photographs, artifacts of a life lived fully, without fear. One photo in particular caught her eye. A candid shot of her mother laughing, her arms wrapped around Emma as a child. They looked so happy, so alive. She tucked the photo into her journal, closing the chapter on her search for answers. Whatever mysteries remained about her family's past, she realized, were less important than the connections she forged in the present. On her final day in Blackwater Cove, she visited Mr. Hawthorne to thank him for his guidance. He greeted her warmly, offering a knowing smile as he handed her a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "For your journey," he said simply. Inside, she found a leather-bound notebook identical to her grandmother's, its pages blank and waiting to be filled.
What's this for?
She asked, confused. "For the stories you'll tell," he replied, "and the ones you'll leave behind." As she boarded the bus that would take her away from Blackwater Cove, Emma glanced out the window at the town she'd once feared. Though it held painful memories, it also carried lessons she would carry with her forever, about grief, resilience, and the courage to face the unknown. Beside her, Lila waved enthusiastically, promising to visit soon. In her lap, Emma clutched the notebook, already imagining the tales she would write, not just for herself, but for anyone brave enough to listen. And as the bus pulled away, she swore she heard her mother's voice one last time, whispering softly, "Be brave, my love." The bus ride out of Blackwater Cove was quieter than Emma had expected. The storm clouds had finally cleared, leaving behind a sky so vast and blue it felt almost alien after weeks of relentless rain. Yet as she stared out the window, watching the town shrink into the distance, she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey wasn't over. Not yet. Lila had promised to visit soon, but Emma knew their paths might never cross again. There was something final about leaving Blackwater Cove, as if stepping outside its borders meant closing a chapter she could never reopen. Still, she clutched the leather-bound notebook Mr. Hawthorne had given her, its blank pages heavy with possibility. For 2 days, Emma wandered aimlessly, staying in cheap motels and avoiding conversations with strangers. She told herself she needed time to process everything that had happened, the whispers, the rituals, the vision of her mother, but deep down, she knew the truth. Something was calling her back. On the third night, the dreams began. At first, they were fragmented, fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures reaching out to her, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of pleas and warnings. Then, One dream stood out from the rest. She was standing on the cliffs again, the ocean stretching endlessly below her. But this time, the figure before her wasn't her mother. It was the weaver, its form more solid and menacing than ever. Its red eyes burned with malice as it loomed over her, its voice layered with countless others. "You cannot escape," it rasped, its skeletal hand brushing against her cheek. "The threads of fate are woven too tightly. Your grief is my anchor." Emma woke with a start, her heart pounding. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the motel curtains. She glanced at the clock. 3:17 a.m. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows. It wasn't just a dream. The weaver wasn't gone. It had been waiting, biding its time until she let her guard down. By morning, Emma had made up her mind. She booked a ticket back to Blackwater Cove, ignoring the nagging voice in her head that screamed she was making a mistake. When she arrived, the town seemed eerily unchanged, as though time itself had frozen during her absence. The streets were deserted, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. Mr. Hawthorne greeted her at the door of his cottage, his expression grim. "I was wondering when you'd return," he said simply, stepping aside to let her in. "How did you know?" Emma asked, dropping her bag on the floor. "The storms came back last night," he replied, gesturing toward the window. Sure enough, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, blotting out the sun. And the whispers, they're louder now. Emma nodded, clutching the notebook tightly. "I thought I'd stopped it. I thought severing the ley lines would be enough." "It was," Mr. Hawthorne confirmed. "But the weaver isn't bound by our rules. It exists wherever despair takes root, and your grief has given it power." "So what do I do?" Emma asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "How do I finish this?" He hesitated, then pulled a dusty tome from his bookshelf. Its cover was cracked and worn, etched with symbols similar to those in her grandmother's journal. "There's one ritual left," he explained. "A binding spell, one that will seal the weaver away permanently. But it comes at a cost." "What kind of cost?" Emma demanded. "Your connection to it," Mr. Hawthorne replied gravely. "The weaver feeds on your grief, your longing for your mother. To banish it, you'll need to sever that tie completely. You'll have to let go, not just of her, but of everything she represents." Emma swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. "And if I refuse, then it will consume you," he said bluntly, "and everyone else in its path." That evening, Emma and Lila met at the old house on the hill. The basement was exactly as they'd left it. The symbol scorched into the floor, the walls scarred from the chaos of their earlier attempts. Together they prepared for the final ritual, following the instructions in Mr. Hawthorne's tome. The steps were simple but daunting. Redraw the protective circle, recite the incantation, and offer a piece of oneself, a memory, a fragment of identity, to act as bait. Once the weaver was drawn into the circle, they would activate the binding spell, trapping it within the void forever. As midnight approached, the storm intensified. Rain pounded against the windows and lightning illuminated the room in flashes of blinding white. Emma knelt at the center of the circle, clutching the lock of her mother's hair tightly in one hand and a shard of mirror in the other. "This is it," Lila whispered, lighting the final candle. "Are you ready?" Emma nodded, though her hands trembled. She closed her eyes, focusing on the memory she intended to sacrifice, the last time she'd seen her mother alive. Her 6th birthday party, the laughter, the warmth, the smell of lavender soap. It was the happiest moment of her childhood, but also the source of her deepest pain. "I'm ready," she said finally, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. The ritual began. Emma recited the incantation, her voice rising above the roar of the storm. Each word felt like a weight lifting from her chest, freeing her from the chains of guilt and regret she'd carried for so long. The symbol beneath her glowed brighter with each passing second, its light pulsating like a heartbeat. Then the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever before. Shadows writhed along the walls, forming familiar shapes that shouldn't exist. One of them detached itself from the rest, looming over Emma like a specter. "You dare challenge me," the weaver hissed, its voice layered with countless others. "You cannot sever the thread without unraveling yourself." Emma ignored it, focusing instead on the shard of mirror in her hand. She pressed it to her forehead, channeling the memory of her mother into the glass. The image shimmered briefly, a fleeting glimpse of Margaret smiling, laughing, alive, before fading into nothingness. "No!" the weaver screamed, lunging forward. But the binding circle held firm, repelling the creature with a deafening hiss. "Now!" Lila shouted, pointing frantically to the final step in the tome. Emma slammed the shard of mirror onto the glowing runes, shattering it into pieces. The room erupted in a blinding flash of light, forcing both women to shield their eyes. For a brief moment, Emma saw her mother's face among the shadows, her expression filled with sorrow and peace. Then, with a deafening crack, the portal opened. The weaver shrieked in agony, its form dissolving into tendrils of smoke as it was dragged into the void. The whispers ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. The storm outside faded, leaving only the gentle patter of rain against the roof. When the light subsided, the room was empty, all traces of the ritual erased, as though it had never happened. Emma collapsed onto the cold floor, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath.
"It's done,"
Lila whispered, kneeling beside her.
"It's really
over." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. She felt lighter somehow, as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had finally been lifted. But there was also a profound sense of loss, a recognition that some wounds could never fully heal. Later that night, as they stood together on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, Emma allowed herself to grieve, not just for her mother, but for the life she might have had if things had been different. The waves crashed violently below, sending sprays of salt water into the air.
"I miss her,"
Emma admitted softly, her voice trembling. "We all do," Lila replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "But she wouldn't want you to stop living. Not for her." Emma nodded, staring out at the endless expanse of water. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could find happiness again. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, she whispered a final goodbye.
Thank you, Mom.
The storm had returned with a vengeance, its fury unmatched by anything Blackwater Cove had seen in decades. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, illuminating the darkened landscape in flashes of blinding white. Rain poured down in sheets, flooding the streets and turning the earth into mud. Inside the old house on the hill, the air was thick with anticipation, charged with an energy that made Emma's skin prickle. She stood at the center of the protective circle, her heart pounding like a drumbeat, counting down to something inevitable. The shard of mirror lay shattered at her feet, its fragments glinting faintly in the flickering candlelight. Around her, the runes carved into the floor pulsed with an otherworldly glow, their light intensifying with each passing second. Lila hovered nervously at the edge of the circle, clutching the ancient tome tightly in her hands.
Are you sure about this?
She asked, for what felt like the 100th time, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm outside. Emma nodded, though her hands trembled.
There's no other way. But what if it doesn't work? What if...
It has to, Emma interrupted firmly, cutting off Lila's doubts before they could take root in her own mind.
We've come too far to turn back now.
Lila hesitated, then nodded reluctantly.
All right, just be careful.
Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. She closed her eyes, focusing on the incantation written in Mr. Hawthorne's tome. Each word felt heavy, layered with centuries of sorrow and sacrifice. As she began to chant, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever before. You cannot escape. Your grief is my anchor. Let me in. Emma ignored them, forcing herself to concentrate on the ritual. The runes beneath her feet flared to life, their glow spreading outward until it filled the entire room. Shadows writhed along the walls, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. One of them detached itself from the rest, looming over Emma like a specter. It was the Weaver. Its form was larger and more menacing than ever, its red eyes burning with malice as it regarded her. Its skeletal hand reached out, brushing against the barrier of the protective circle. The contact sent sparks flying, accompanied by a deafening hiss. You dare defy me, it rasped, its voice layered with countless others. Do you truly believe you can banish me? Emma clenched her fists, tears streaming down her face.
I have to try.
The Weaver tilted its head, studying her with an expression that might have been curiosity, if such a thing were possible for a being devoid of humanity. Your mother tried the same, it said softly, its tone almost mocking. And look where it got her. Emma flinched, the memory of her mother's fractured soul flashing through her mind. But she refused to let it break her. Instead, she channeled every ounce of grief, guilt, and love into the ritual, fueling the binding spell with raw emotion. The circle erupted in a blinding flash of golden light, forcing the weaver to recoil. Its screams echoed through the room, a cacophony of voices layered with agony and rage. Then, with a deafening crack, the portal opened. The room shook violently, sending books tumbling from shelves and chairs toppling over. Emma stumbled backward, bracing herself against the onslaught. Through the chaos, she saw figures emerging from the portal, shadowy forms coalescing into humanoid shapes. Among them was her mother. Margaret Calloway stepped forward, separating herself from the others. Her translucent form shimmered faintly, like sunlight filtered through glass. Though her features were indistinct, her presence radiated warmth and familiarity.
"Mom?"
Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face.
"Emma,"
Margaret replied softly, extending a hand.
"my sweet girl."
Emma hesitated, torn between the desire to run to her mother and the knowledge that doing so would undo everything she'd worked for.
"I thought I lost you,"
she choked out, her voice breaking.
"You never did,"
Margaret assured her, stepping closer.
"I've always been with you, in your memories, in your heart. That's where I belong. Not here, not anymore."
Emma nodded, clutching the lock of hair tightly in her hand.
"I'm sorry,"
she whispered finally, her voice barely audible over the storm.
"for everything." "There's nothing to forgive,"
Margaret replied, her expression filled with compassion.
"You've made me proud, Emma. Now it's time to let go."
With those words, her form began to fade, dissolving into the starlit sky like mist carried away by the wind. Emma watched until the last trace of her vanished, leaving only the sound of the ocean and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. As the portal began to collapse, the weaver lunged forward, its form dissolving into tendrils of smoke as it was dragged into the void. Its screams reverberated through the room, fading into silence as the light subsided. When the ritual ended, the room was eerily quiet, all traces of the supernatural erased, as though it had never happened. Emma collapsed onto the cold floor, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath.
"It's done,"
Lila whispered, kneeling beside her.
"It's really over."
Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. She felt lighter somehow, as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had finally been lifted. But there was also a profound sense of loss, a recognition that some wounds could never fully heal. Later that night, as they stood together on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, Emma allowed herself to grieve, not just for her mother, but for the life she might have had if things had been different. The waves crashed violently below, sending sprays of salt water into the air.
"I miss her,"
Emma admitted softly, her voice trembling.
"We all do,"
Lila replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders.
"But she wouldn't want you to stop living. Not for her."
Emma nodded, staring out at the endless expanse of water. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could find happiness again. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, she whispered a final goodbye.
"Thank you, Mom."
Years passed, and the storm that had once ravaged Blackwater Cove became little more than a memory, a tale whispered among townsfolk on quiet winter nights. The old house on the hill stood abandoned, its windows dark and its porch sagging under the weight of time and neglect. Yet for those who dared to venture close, there was an undeniable sense of peace about the place, as though the land itself had finally exhaled after holding its breath for decades. Emma Calloway never returned to Blackwater Cove, not physically at least. After the events of that fateful night, she left the town behind, carrying with her not just the scars of her journey, but also the lessons it had taught her. She settled in a small coastal city miles away, where the sound of waves crashing against the shore reminded her of home without stirring the ghosts of her past. Her life took shape slowly, like clay molded by careful hands. She began writing, pouring her experiences into stories that blurred the line between reality and imagination. Her first novel, a chilling tale inspired by the whispers of Blackwater Cove, became a bestseller, earning her critical acclaim and a devoted readership. Critics praised her ability to weave terror with tenderness, creating narratives that lingered long after the final page. But Emma knew the truth. Her words weren't fiction. They were fragments of a life she'd fought to reclaim, threads pulled from the tapestry of grief and resilience. On rainy nights, when the wind howled like a forgotten lament, Emma sometimes sat by her window, staring out at the darkness beyond. She didn't hear the whispers anymore, not the way she used to, but occasionally she thought she caught echoes of her mother's voice carried on the breeze. "Be brave, my love." At first, she wondered if it was simply her mind playing tricks, filling the silence with memories too precious to let go. But over time, she came to believe it was something more, a reminder that her mother's love transcended even death, existing in the spaces between moments. One evening, as she worked on her latest manuscript, her phone buzzed with a text message from Lila Harper. It had been years since they'd last spoken, though their friendship remained etched in Emma's heart like ink on paper. "Thinking of you tonight," the message read. "The rain sounds different here. Almost alive." Emma smiled faintly, typing a reply before setting the phone aside. "It always does," she wrote. "Take care of yourself, Lila." As she turned back to her work, she noticed something unusual. A faint shimmer in the corner of the room, like sunlight filtering through glass. For a brief moment, she thought she saw her mother standing there, translucent and glowing faintly, offering a sad but loving smile. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the vision faded, leaving behind only the steady rhythm of rain against the window pane. In Blackwater Cove, Lila Harper continued her own journey, painting scenes inspired by the stories Emma had shared. Her studio became a sanctuary of sorts, filled with canvases depicting shadowy figures reaching out from storm-soaked landscapes. Though Emma's presence was absent, her influence lingered in every brushstroke, every color choice, every haunting detail. On particularly stormy evenings, Lila swore she could hear whispers drifting through the cracks in her window pane. At first, she feared them, remembering the chaos they had unleashed years ago. But over time, she grew to understand their purpose, to remind her of the fragile boundary between worlds and the importance of guarding it. One night, as she worked late into the early hours of the morning, she noticed something strange in one of her paintings. Among the swirling colors and ghostly shapes, a familiar face stared back at her. It was Emma, or at least it looked like her. The resemblance was uncanny, the same determined set of her jaw, the same warmth in her eyes. But there was something ethereal about her, as though she existed somewhere between realms. Beneath the portrait, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. "Thank you." Lila froze, staring at the canvas in disbelief. Then, glancing toward the window, she thought she heard Emma's voice on the wind, soft and comforting. "Be brave, Lila." For the first time in years, Lila smiled. Not out of sadness or longing, but out of gratitude. Because some stories are meant to live forever, even if they exist only in the spaces between dreams and reality. And so, the legacy of Blackwater Cove endured, not as a curse, but as a testament to the resilience of those who dared to face the unknown. Through Emma's words and Lila's art, the Whispers found a new purpose: to remind the living that even in loss, there is love. Even in darkness, there is light. And sometimes, just sometimes, the rain carries voices worth listening to.